He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Chapter 6. Stuck to Unstuck. There have been many instances in history when a moment of overconfidence has snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. One can think of Goliath donning his huge armour to go out in hand-to-hand combat against a little Israeli boy with a sling. Berthnoth of Malden allowing the Viking horde to cross the causeway to give them a chance to fight fair and slaughter him on the beach. Harold Godwinson rushing to meet William at Hastings rather than doing what his mum suggested and sitting in London and watching the invaders starve. The French aristocracy trusting to expensive heavy armour and short-range weapons on the long-bowed muddy field of Agincourt. Custer at Little Bighorn. As a rabbit who prided himself on his knowledge of such tactics and historical disasters, one might have thought that Fat Rabbit would have known that the lesson from history is, when the odds have unexpectedly tipped in your favour, don't take the piss. The chronicle of Fat Rabbit's farm records the event in its usual brief style. The handwriting, that is aptly fat and rounded, with circles over the eyes and that has little flowers instead of full stops, has led most historians to suspect it was written by Treacle. The entry for this day reads, "The enemy entered the farm intent on putting all hoofed animals to the sword. Fat Rabbit's cunning plan outwitted them totally. Despite this, battle was still joined, which resulted in..." And here we must stop to avoid a spoiler. After careful analysis of all the available documents, and with the help of eyewitness accounts, we are confident in offering the following accurate reconstruction of events that day. "At 10, begins Fat Rabbit, confident in the success of his plan. Warns Plato, but sadly his interjection is misinterpreted as a purr. "Shin!" shouts our hero. In unprecedented unison, all the animals salute the oberst with the utmost vigour and pride. And it is at this moment, as they say, when it all goes to pot. Woolly, carried away by relief, rushes to salute, but a hastily stitched and gaffer-taped polar bear claw remains in the mud. Thus she waves her hoof sheepishly at the corporal. In an abortive attempt to grab her polar bear foot and replace it, the other foot comes off, sucked in the treacherous mud of the trenches, and thus she is frontally exposed. At the same crucial moment, Melissa also salutes. Her waste paper basket sticks perfectly immobile in the quagmire, and she waves her hoof at the oberst. By the cruelest twist of fate, her snout itches and twitches. She raises a handkerchief and reveals another hoof. And all in vain, for the sneeze that rips through her body blows off her hastily attached trunk, that boomerangs through the air and drapes itself around the Cacinum Furus shoulders. "What?" screams the oberst. "Hoofs! Hoofs! Hoofs and footmuff!" screams Corporal Clot into light. "Bugger," thinks Fat Rabbit, before issuing his first urgent command. "Run for it!" Oh, the chaos that ensues. As animals flee, leaving fake feet or footprints sinking in the mud, so too the culling squad find themselves held back by the all-encompassing sludge. All discipline breaks down, units disperse around Fat Rabbit's farm as all hell breaks loose, and suddenly it is every ungulate for himself. "Gas, gas, quick boys," shouts Fat Rabbit meaninglessly amongst the ecstasy of fumbling. He's hot on the heels of Melissa, who is pretty nimble for a porcine, as she half runs and half slides, this way now that, trying to evade the corporal and the oberst who are in hot pursuit. The air is full of shouts and screams and the whistle of wantonly discharged bolts that rattle rapidly off the buildings of the farmyard, denting tin, chipping paint and breaking windows in a hasty orison. The mud quickly besmirches the pristine pearl whiteness of the culling squad as they slither and slide in pursuit of their more futsal quarry. And in this mayhemic melee, as in all wars, scant regard is given to whether an animal is an ungulate or not. All are in the firing line. Lightning the owl, possibly the wisest and definitely the oldest denizen of dodgy Tenor Wood, leads the aerial defence. Together with Cheryl the Sparrow and Daffodil and Desiree, not usually known for showing off their flying ability, he dives, circles and dives again, flapping and pecking at the heads of the men, distracting aims and causing much waving of hands. This assault from the skies spreads confusion like a tube train spreads a cold. For Roger and Plato, the battle is a whirl of repeated blurred patterns as the donkey gallops round and round the well, Plato limpet-like on his back, the unlikely pair hotly pursued by a bolt gun-wielding man in white. "I can't shake him, Rabbit Leader, I can't shake him," brays Roger desperately. "Faster, faster," demands the cat. Then suddenly their pursuer reels to one side and staggers to a halt, wobbling like a building in an earthquake. Inside his head the world continues to flash by for a moment before all is darkness, and he faints to the floor. Roger keeps going. By the farmyard gate, Archibald mounts a more organised defence. He has upset the apple cart and its tender affections in order to use it as a barricade and a source of ammunition. By his side are his less noble companions, Floozy, Treacle and Blue, who are hurling fruit with gusto at the men attempting to advance towards their position. Each volley of steel bolts that hit the upturned cart is met with an equally vicious return of hard, unripe apples. "Who says I throw like a girl?" shouts Treacle with uncharacteristic bravado as another of her well-aimed missiles hits an adversary square on the nose as effectively as any brickbat. That is what it was really like on that summer's day at Fat Rabbit's farm, as the battle raged with no side seeming to gain advantage over the other. And who can tell how it might have turned out if Melissa, with Fat Rabbit struggling to keep up and ducking to avoid the odd bolt that zipped over his head, hadn't sneezed, closed her eyes, lost her bearings, taken a wrong turn, and skidded right through the unhelpfully opened door of the woodshed. Fat Rabbit was too concerned with dodging bullets to notice Melissa's mistake until he crashed unceremoniously into the substantial rear end of the farm's prize porker, scattering logs and kindling in all directions. "How many buggering times do I have to tell people to close the doors around here?" asked Fat Rabbit as he picked himself up and brushed woodlice and spiders out of his fur. His question hovered unanswered, however, as suddenly the doorway was filled with the unmistakable silhouettes of the Oberst and Corporal Clot. Fat Rabbit and Melissa were trapped. "Bugger!" exclaimed Fat Rabbit. "Ah, chew!" sneezed Melissa. "Well, well, well," sneered the Oberst, his eyes flickering with a devilish light. "What have we here, Corporal?" "Looks to me like a filthy ungulate heavily infested with foot-moths, sir," replied Corporal Clot, slowly and deliberately reloading his bolt gun. "I do believe you're right," agreed the Oberst, "and as such it is our duty under regulation Foxtrot 64 Foxtrot Echo Tango to call such ungulates to prevent the spread of this vile disease. But here's that little fellow with the floppy ears and covered in cobwebs." "Hard to tell in this here dim light of a woodshed, sir," said Clot, taking a step forward. "Indeed it is, Corporal. Best cull it too, in case it's one of those disgusting, squealing baby ungulates, just waiting to spread more foot-and-mouth." "Hang on a minute," said Fat Rabbit as the Corporal took another menacing step towards the two doomed friends and Melissa tried to bury into the log pile. "Aren't we meant to get a last request or something?" The Oberst glowered at Fat Rabbit. "Corporal?" he asked without taking his eyes off his quarry. "I'm afraid he's correct, sir. Those condemned to die, as well as saluting, are entitled to a last request of reasonable sorts, sir, though being allowed to go home for a cuppa is not permitted." Bah! Snorted his commander. We've never done it before. Never had one that could talk, sir. Very well, Rabbit, spat the Oberst. What is your final request? And it better not be a trick. If truth be told, Fat Rabbit nearly blew it by asking for a cigarette. He was, after all, gasman, and it had been a particularly stressful morning. I'd just like to kiss my friend goodbye, said Fat Rabbit. Melissa looked a little shocked and whispered, I never knew you cared, as a tear slowly rolled down her cheek. How sweet, sneered the Oberst. Very well, let's get this disgusting moment over with. Fat Rabbit turned around and hugged Melissa before giving the biggest full-on lingering tongues and all snog you can ever imagine a rabbit giving to a pig, if indeed you can bring yourself to imagine such a thing. It went on for quite a long time, to the Oberst's obvious annoyance. As the kiss finished, Melissa turned an even deeper shade of pink and muttered, Oh, Fats, I never knew you cared so much. Our hero threw back his ears defiantly, lifted a single finger of hesitation, and waited a moment. Suddenly, his nose began to twitch, first almost imperceptibly, and then with increasing violence until it threatened to leave his furry face. Eventually, he could hold back no longer. Achoo! Sneezed Fat Rabbit incredibly loudly. Bugger it! He eventually exclaimed. I seem to have contracted foot and mouth. The Oberst and Corporal Clot looked on in horrified amazement. My God! Cross-species instant contagion! Stuttered the Oberst. Sir, the rabbit's got the lurgy! Shouted the Corporal. Bugger! So it would appear, said Fat Rabbit, wiping his nose. And for my next amorous adventure... Before either the Oberst or the Corporal could take in the enormity of this viral mutation, Fat Rabbit bounded straight into the arms of his adversary, and as the Oberst vainly tried to prise him off, delivered an equally lingering full-on tongues and all snog. Again, I'll leave it to your imagination. Get off me! Shouted the Oberst, but Fat Rabbit clung on like a stalking ex-partner. It took a blow from the butt end of a bolt gun to finally send the determined Lapan lover sprawling into the sawdusted floor. Ouch! Complained Fat Rabbit. You're going to hurt someone with that if you're not careful. Enough! Shouted the Oberst, wiping the remnants of Fat Rabbit's snotty kiss from his face with the back of his hand. Clot! It is time your bolt gun put an end to these shenanigans once and for all. Cross-contamination between species cannot be allowed to happen. Cross-contamination would... The Oberst's rant was interrupted by a large twitch of his nose, quickly followed by another. As his hairy nostrils began to flare, troubled concern spread across his brow, a concern that rapidly grew into an expression of mild horror that invaded and overran his entire face. Go on, you bugger, muttered Fat Rabbit hopefully. Yet just as Fat Rabbit's hopes began to rise, the Oberst sniffed deeply. Where was I? He snapped. Ah, yes. Foot and mouth cross-contamination would pose such a deep threat to the world order that it is imperative that it must be stopped at any cost. It is a matter of... Achoo! It was a sneeze of quite epic proportions, the force of which would have flung Fat Rabbit back against the woodpile had he not been as sure-footed as a mountain gecko. Oh dear, he said. Fagger, said the Oberst. Corporal Clot's jaw slowly dropped, like golden syrup being poured onto porridge. As it did so, his eyes revealed the slow workings of a plodding military mind struggling to go from A to B to C. Achoo! Sneezed Fat Rabbit. Achoo! Echoed the Oberst. Cross-contamination, said the Corporal as light bulbs came on in his mind. From ungulates to rabbit to human! The oberst began to look very worried as the corporal slowly raised his bolt gun. "I regret, sir," he said with soldierly calm, "that I'm going to have to kill you too."
"What?"
shrieked his commanding officer.
"Don't be stupid, man. Put down that weapon. As your superior, I order you to put down that weapon."
"Sorry, sir, but Fuddenmouth cross-contamination would pose such a deep threat to the world order that it is imperative that it must be stopped at any cost."
But I'm your commanding officer,"
protested the oberst. "Not anymore, sir. Regulations clearly state that the next senior rank can take command in a battlefield situation if the officer commanding is killed, wounded, rendered mentally unstable, or gets a lurgy. As such, I am promoting myself to sergeant and taking immediate command of this unit." Satisfied in the sense of his own authority, the corporal began to raise his weapon. Realizing that it was now or never, Fat Rabbit seized the moment. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Melissa by the ear with one hand and giving the corporal a hefty shove towards the oberst with the other before heading for the door. Caught off guard, Clot blundered into his former commander, who in turn pushed him back towards the log pile before fleeing too for the door. Out into the courtyard ran Fat Rabbit, still with a firm grip on Melissa's ear, as the stout sow tried her best to keep up with the lithe Lapan. Only a yard or two behind came the oberst, and just behind him, Corporal Clot, who had recovered from Fat Rabbit's surprise attack with remarkable professionalism and alarming alacrity.
"Head for the pond and make like a duck,"
shouted Fat Rabbit to Melissa, giving her ear a final tug. As the sniffling pig headed off as fast as her trotters could carry her, our hero dashed to the well, where he finally lost his footing on the mud and skidded, ears and arms a-flailing, straight into the path of Roger and Plato, who were still careering around the well like a Catherine wheel. As Roger tripped over the outstretched Fat Rabbit and muzzle dived into the mud, Plato was flung somersaulting towards the roof of the well. With all the feline felicity of Lara Croft, Plato turned on the claws and hammered into the wooden slats, gripping it like a souvenir magnet on a fridge. As Fat Rabbit knocked the mud out of his ears and Roger dizzied in the drizzle, Plato vomited surreptitiously over the edge of the roof. "Feeling a little sickly?" asked Fat Rabbit.
"Airball,"
replied the cat nonchalantly. Keeping his wits, Fat Rabbit crawled around the wall of the well to see what was happening as Plato soft pattered down beside him. The oberst was desperately trying to zigzag his way across the farmyard, slipping and sliding, cheating and hiding. Corporal Clot, bolt gunning hot on his heels, shouting, To me! Cross-contamination target vector 30 Alpha Foxtrot 320! Fat Rabbit watched with delight as confusion spread like a Fitou stain on a carpet amongst the culling squad. Some blindly followed the corporal, unsure as to why they were now trying to cull the CO, whilst others saw their comrades rushing across the farmyard as a sure sign of retreat. As the oberst unintentionally led the rout to the gate, Archibald and the Apple crew rained a savage barrage of best Bramleys on the fleeing invaders. It was only their protective clothing, and it has to be admitted, some pretty shocking throwing, that saved them from sustaining serious casualties. As the last member of the culling squad headed up the lane, Floozy got a final hit on her fleeing adversary as she shouted triumphantly after him, "And don't you come down in my door no more!"
"That's true,"
sneezed Fat Rabbit.
He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit